In today's video, we're going to talk about a case that is almost all in one, except missing some main components, right? So we're missing here a motherboard, RAM, CPU, GPU, and SSD. Everything else is packed right inside this case. So this is Cooler Master's NCore 100 Max, and it comes packed with, this is 120mm AIO, and of course we have an 850 watts modular power supply. So it kind of comes all packed. Reroute is already done when we're talking about tubes and cables, and the lengths are just perfect to be able to basically just place the main components that are missing. And that'll be all for today. Thanks for watching. Nah, I'm just kidding. Of course, this case brings something new to the table. Even though we've seen something like this, and we have something like this from NZXT H1, but regardless of that, we have something that is, I would say, more approachable when we're saying about huge graphic cards. Because check this out, this is MSI GeForce RTX 4080 Gaming X Trio. First, it's quite thick card, then it's a quite long card, and we're talking about 4080, and it's going to be quite interesting to see the thermals, because there's going to be, of course, benchmarks and loads of other stuff that you need to know. But the process of building inside this case is quite interesting. First of all, we have two 90-degree side panels. One is on this side where the GPU is, and here on the front. And then we have the other one, which is right here covering the motherboard, AIO, and everything else. They are attached to the case with 4 pegs, so 2 on each side. We have 2 on this side and 2 on the other. And you can extend the case. This gives you quite an insane option to adjust the thickness of the chassis based on your GPU. This kind of gives more airflow to the case and gives it, let's say, more breathing room, because it's not so close to the dust filter. So as you can see on this side right here, where you have these locks to remove the side panel, you have 2 separations for pegs. And if you decide to do so, you can place this panel right here on the further part, and then you just swap the top panel, this is a meshed part right here, with the one that you get inside the accessory box. Now, before we go into specifications about the NCore 100 Max, I'm going to tell you what you have inside the accessory box. So apart from the larger top cover, you get additional cables like SATA, CPU, GPU, and all the other stuff, because not everybody's running 12 VHP WR cables, well, basically RTX 4000 and 3000 series. Additionally to that, you get loads of screws, you get zip ties, just to reorganize the tubes and the cables so you can close the panel properly. I didn't use any of the zip ties because I managed to organize everything nicely, and it kind of did work quite alright, I do have to say. Now, when we go further and discuss the design, first of all, it's a quite nice shape. When you take into consideration that it's more taller than wide and thick, it's quite nice to check this out on any table, and it kind of, because of the vertical position, saves loads of desk space. And this is where it comes in more appropriate manner when we're talking about small gaming desk setups, or just for your workspace if you have limited desk space, right? The power button is right here on the front, right on the corner, lights up, as well as the I/O pump block top. Then we have 2 USB 3.0, and we have USB Type-C and 3.5mm jack, 4-pole for connecting everything. This is actually the first case that I reviewed for quite some time that I actually connected all the cables, including USB 3.0 and USB Type-C, and HD audio. Why is this? Well, for ATX cases, MIDI tower, full tower, and all the other stuff, of course you have loads of space to connect the cables, right? And in that sense, I don't see a point in the review to actually connect those, because you'll be able to reorganize everything. The speeds are always there, you don't have to worry about that. But what I wanted to test with this case, when I connect all the cables, will I be able to reorganize everything nicely? And yeah, there was no problem whatsoever. So this is kind of cool, and brings us to the point that Cooler Master with this case actually managed to do everything properly when we're talking about organization, cable management. And I mean, honestly, the GPU fits by a millimeter, literally a millimeter or even less, because I had to kind of a bit push it inside, but nothing got scratched. So yeah, there's that. Most likely PCI expansion slots were a bit, I don't know, that way designed, so I had to push it in a bit more. So we have two colors, we have dark gray and we have bronze edition. Talking about material, we have steel, plastic and aluminium, and the side panels are complete aluminium. Now the volume is 15.8 liters in normal mode, in expansion mode is 17.54. Motherboard support is ITX, and for the expansion slots, when we're talking about GPU, you have 3 expansion slots. Now, the GPU can go up to 3.9 slots, which is insane, and this comes in practice when you expand the side panel and put the different top cover. You have one slot for 2.5-inch SSD. Talking about the I/O panel and the exact connections, we have two USB 3.2 generation 1 type A and one USB 3.2 generation 2 times 2 type C. One audio combo jack for audio in and out 3.5 millimeter. Now, including accessories, you have 240 millimeter PCI Express 4.0 x 16 riser. CPU cooling solution, we have 120 millimeter radiator with 38 millimeter of thickness and one custom PWM fan maxing out at 2400 RPMs. The power supply, we have VSFX Gold 850 watts ATX 3.0. And there's another pre-installed fan, 120mm SickleFlow PWM at 1800 RPMs. Clearance for the CPU cooler is 48mm, but honestly you don't even have to take that into consideration because you have a pre-installed AIO. Power supply clearance, again the same thing, 100mm, and clearance for the RAMs is 48mm. Graphic card clearance, now here's the catch. 337mm times 62 times 180mm in normal 3.0 slot thickness. Then we have another thing, 357mm times 79 times 180 expansions, 3.9 slot thick, maximum space including GPU and the power connector. Now the 12 VHPWR is labeled at 450 watts and it's angled by 90 degrees. So this gives you a nice opportunity to connect your graphic card without a single hiccup and gives you some options to actually organize the cables as I stated. So cable rerouting behind the motherboard tray for the PCI Express riser, and we have dust filters on side panels. So altogether it's nicely arranged case. So let me just show you. If you want to remove this part right here, you do it like so. You just have to push it a bit harder because you have these pegs. On this side panel we have opening for the motherboard and additionally extended part for this opening because you have some sort of an extrusion parts that you can use zip ties to reorganize the cables at the back coming out from the motherboard. So the motherboard is located in a normal position, and that's really cool because some other SFF builds cases tend to place the motherboard in let's say vertical position. When we're talking about vertical position of the motherboard, that means all the connections are at the bottom, and this brings us to the point where you want to connect something, you have to do it like so and do this. Now, of course, logical, since it's a vertical position of the case, that you'll be connecting your GPU from the bottom, and in this scenario you actually don't need an angled HDMI or DisplayPort because it's risen up so nicely that it gives you an option to connect it with a regular cable and it bends at the end, and you even have an opening here at the back where the power supply cable is because you're rerouting the HDMI cable from the back, and that's really good, kind of helps it. Beneath the motherboard where the PCI riser is, you have loads of space to reorganize the cables, as I mentioned, Type-C and USB 3.1, and here above you're gonna cover, of course, the RAMs. That's why I use Thin Group's T-Create non-RGB RAMs, because there's no point, right? The SFX power supply is right here, nicely located. We have one exhaust fan coming right here, and as I said, all the cables are just enough to be able to connect literally everything. Loads of extrusions for those, as I said, the zip ties to reorganize everything, but you don't have to literally use anything because everything is nicely well placed. So yeah, there's that. It does work and it does turn on and everything works properly fine, so there's no problem with that, even with the GPU. So that's really cool, and it gives you kind of an option to really go with a high-end GPU. But for the CPU, what's the solution and what would you do? Now, in this scenario, I didn't want to go with AMD Ryzen 9 7900X3D because it does heat up and it does have a higher TDP. So I went with AMD Ryzen 7 Pro 7745, which is still an okay processor to pair up with this GPU. And it doesn't have that high TDP, it's somewhere around 95 or 105 watts, which is cool for this type of AIO, even though the thickness it's still a 120, and it kind of brings to the point where it could do some wonders. So since we're talking about wonders, let's check out the benchmarks, synthetic, and of course some gaming this time, because I really wanted to see how this acts while gaming. So let's start with, of course, standard AIDA 64 Extreme Edition. CPU went up to 77 degrees at 30 minutes benchmark, with the clock speed going around on average 4850 megahertz. The GPU was at 69 degrees and GPU idle was 40. So it goes up 29 degrees, and that's really okay, I would say, because AIDA 64 is pushing the GPU and the CPU at 100% maximum, and we have, as already stated, RTX 4080 Gaming X Trio and AMD Ryzen 7 Pro 7745. That's something. Then Cinebench R23, we go with 75 degrees constant throughout whole 10 tests. And what happens in those 10 tests? We get first benchmark 4825 megahertz clock speed, and it lowers down throughout those 10 tests to 4775 megahertz. It starts at 17,337 Cinebench points and gets lowered down to 17,112, eventually decreasing the performance. I don't know why, but when we take into consideration the cooling capacity of this AIO, and if you remember last time I tested out this CPU with a 360, it went out to 18,000 Cinebench score points. So taking into consideration that we are running a much smaller footprint of a case with a 120mm AIO 38mm of thickness, these scores are quite alright, I do have to say. And now let's go into gaming, because as already stated, for you guys that have a smaller gaming setup, you want to have a smaller footprint on your table when we're talking about the case size, I really wanted to check this out. So Hogwarts Legacy RTX Ultra 1440p, average was 57 FPS, but regardless of that, CPU was 74 degrees Celsius, GPU was 58 degrees Celsius. Miles Morales, of course, RTX Ultra 1440p, FPS average 132, CPU went up to 77 degrees Celsius, and GPU went up to 59 degrees Celsius. PUBG Ultra 1440p, average FPS was 203, CPU went up to 75 and GPU went up to 58 degrees Celsius. Witcher 3 Ultra Ray Tracing 1440p, average FPS 78, CPU 69 degrees and GPU 53. And then we go to Shadow of Tomb Raider Ultra Ray Tracing 1440p, FPS average was 173, CPU 77 degrees and the GPU 55 degrees. So I would say the thermals are great. I didn't expect the GPU in gaming to be above, let's say, 15 to maximum 20 degrees Celsius higher than on idle. But in AIDA 64 it did go almost 30 degrees above. Regardless of that, I did expect much higher thermals. And this is all done with the side panel placed in the original position, so I didn't extend it. If I did extend it, maybe the GPU would get a bit more headroom to get more fresh air, and that would be quite alright. Maybe 1-2 degrees lower, and that would be it. The CPU, if you go with a higher CPU with a higher TDP, expect higher thermals, which means heating up the whole chassis and everything, heating up the top panel as well, because this currently in idle is being a bit hotter than we're used to. But when we heat up the processor, when everything heats up, including the liquid and the radiator, it does get warmer a bit. But all in all, I would say I'm quite satisfied. It is a quite nice case. What they did is something outstanding, I would say. Quite nice modularity when we're talking about, but I wouldn't say modularity. I would say more like accessibility. Because the only frustration that I had building inside this case is the cables are, and the tubes of course, are right here on the motherboard part. So you do need to kind of wiggle the motherboard around to be able to place it inside. The cables are just plug and play in terms of you just have to grab the cable, plug it in, that's it. The tubes mount the brackets for the AAO pump block top, and that's it. Again, we're talking about quite straightforward connection and everything else. The only thing, the additional only thing that really bugged me when deassembling the case from the box are those ties that are used to hold the cables, hold the tubes and everything else while it's packed. They really did an incredible job packing it, but also a frustrating job to actually remove everything outside of the case. So all in all, yeah, I have to approve this case. So PC Crazy approved badge without a doubt. You can check out the link in the description if you decide to grab it yourself. I'll place both links for both color schemes. I don't know, maybe you like the other one. The bronze one looks also outstanding, and this dark gray also is quite nice. And both are elegant cases with a small footprint. And I'll leave it at that. Guys, thank you for watching today's one. Hope I gave you more insights about it. And if I did, and if it did help you, don't forget to subscribe, hit the like button, click the notification bell for future content coming quite shortly. Thanks for watching. Bye bye.